Shalom. I'd like to give all reverence, due benevolence, worship, honor, praise, and glory unto the Most High God, whose name is Yahweh, and His only begotten Son, whose name is Yahweh Shai. This is an exhortation to you, Jake, speaking to those of you whose fathers consider themselves to be Black, Hispanic, or Native American, that you are the true Israelite to the Bible. And it is important that once you embrace that understanding that you are the children of Jacob, who had his name changed to Israel, that you walk in the ways of the Lord, that you keep his commandments, and you build your faith. But as I lead off with in the exhortations that I publish, the Israelites who we recognize are predominantly the so-called Blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, so who we would consider to be, say, African American, Jamaican, Haitian, Cuban, Puerto Rican, Dominican, Mexican, for example. But we also have to understand that the Lord's heritage comes in many different shades. So we can't necessarily look at someone and 100% definitively say that they are not an Israelite, because our people are scattered throughout the four corners of the earth. So I'm going to start in the book of Jeremiah. I'm going to get Jeremiah chapter 12. In verse number 9, it says, "Mine heritage is unto me as a speckled bird. The birds round about are against her. Come ye, assemble all the beasts of the field, come to devour." So the Lord here is saying that his heritage is unto him like a speckled bird. Now, what does that mean? If you look at a bird and it's very speckled, it has like different spots, different colors. There are several different species of birds that come in many different colors, different shades. That's what the Lord is likening Israel unto a bird that has many different hues, shades, colors. Now, why is that important? Because if you look at a Puerto Rican and you put them next to an African American, they could be separated by multiple shades. Of course, there are Puerto Ricans who are darker skinned, or in the case of like Cubans, for example, there are a bunch of Cubans who are very dark skinned to where they would look like Judites, or they would look like Benjamites. And the same thing for African Americans. You have light skins, people who are just naturally light skinned. So if you look at someone, you can't necessarily tell with all certainty who they are. Because not only so, but I also did a previous exhortation, which is a great one to watch after you listen to this exhortation, on the fact that nationality is predicated around your patrilineal descent. So that's talking about who your father is. So you could have a mother who's of all the different races and what we would call modern day nationalities that we see in the world today. But if your father is, let's say, Caucasian, or your father is Chinese, then you are what your father is. Of course, our people are scattered abroad throughout, say, Europe and Asia as well. So the same thing can be applied in reverse, where you may have a father who is what we would call Chinese today, for example. But going back generations, 5, 10 generations, he had a Judite who was one of his however many great grandfathers. And so because of that, he is a Judite. That great ancestor may have married a Moabite woman, gave birth to a son. That son married a Moabite woman, gave birth to a son. And over time, the phenotype changed to where in the 10th generation, that son now looks completely like what we would call a Chinese person or a Moabite, according to the scriptures. But again, based off of that generational lineage, you are who your father is. So we identified the Israelites based off of the nations in which they hail from, according to their father. So if you say my father is from Brazil, for example, or let's say, better yet, my father is from Haiti, then we know that based off of the dispersion of the tribes, based off of the transatlantic slave trade, that a large concentration of the tribe of Levi wound up in Haiti. And so over the course of the years, over the course of the generations, the tribe of Levi is what we consider the modern day Haitians to be. Same thing for the Judites who were taken from the west coast of Africa, brought to the United States of America. Same thing applies there. And there are a lot of Judites also in many parts of Europe. Those are just a few examples. So that spectrum is pretty broad, and the same thing goes not only just for skin type, but also hair type as well, because a lot of our people have a bad habit of characterizing based off of hair type. But again, if you take a Dominican and you put them next to someone who's from Trinidad and Tobago, for example, maybe a different hair type. So we can't always just put aside those who, and before I even get there, the same thing goes for someone who may look like an Edomite. The vast majority are what we would characterize them as at first glance. But if the Spirit testifies, then you may be looking at someone who looks like a pure Edomite who very well could be an Israelite, Judite, whatever tribe that they're from. So it's important to understand that, to grasp that concept, and to not put 1,000% of your characterizations into skin type alone. And let me see if I can get the other precept that I want, because there's another precept in the scriptures that speaks specifically about the tribe of Ephraim and the likeness of the tribe of Ephraim, what they would look like based off of admixture. Bear with me while I search for that precept. This is the book of Hosea, chapter 7 and verse 8. It says, Ephraim, he hath mixed himself among the people. Ephraim is a cake not turned. So the Lord is telling us right here that the Ephraimites have mixed themselves among the people. And the Ephraimites were one of the chief tribes in the northern kingdom. And there was a lot of mixture between the people groups in the northern kingdom from the time that our people were still in the Holy Land. And the Ephraimites are who we would consider the Puerto Ricans to be today. And once they were brought over into what we would call the New World, the fourth part of the earth, we see now that Puerto Ricans, again, come in many different tones. So when you look at a cake, for example, like if you're baking a cake, you have to turn it so that it's cooked on both sides all the way through, that it's baked on both sides all the way through. So if a cake is not turned, I mean, when you make cake batter, what color is it? It's like a cream color, like a tan color. Could be like a dark tan or a mild tan, depending on what you put, like what ingredients you put in that cake. If you put cinnamon, whatever it is. But the point is that cake, same thing with like just picture like a pancake, for example. Before you turn that pancake over, it's someone who we would consider like someone who's very light skinned. A so-called black person who's very light skinned, but when you turn it over, that pancake is like brown, like someone who's like a brown skinned person. So that's what that's talking about there. So again, by and large, our people are the so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, but we're also dispersed throughout the four corners of the earth. So we have people in Ethiopia. Our people are largely concentrated in countries like Brazil and France and Great Britain. But there are also sons and daughters of Jacob who are in parts of Asia, in the Middle East, what we would call the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, in the Levant. So prior to Israel coming out of their captivities, out of the lands of their captivities, the Lord will sift his people out before nuclear destruction takes place. And that's not to say sifted out as in a person who came into the knowledge of the truth of their heritage according to the scriptures and then fell away. But I'll get that in the book of Amos, chapter 9. Because that's one of the big things that we need to be focused on, situated on in this walk, is that once we turn unto the Lord and we start reforming our hearts, becoming receptive to the Rakak Wadash, that we need to look forward to the deliverance that's about to take place. So this is Amos chapter 9 and verse 9. It says, "For lo, I will command and I will sift the house of Israel among all nations, like as corn is sifted in a sieve. Yet shall not the least grain fall upon the earth." So the Lord here is saying that he will sift Israel from among all nations. So that we need to take that very literally, in that the Israelites are in all nations. So there are Israelites right now in Polynesia, in countries like Australia, New Zealand, who made their way over there. And especially in modern times, the way that travel has opened up so much in the last, 100 years, 120 years, by way of ships, and then by way of airplanes. People can get around the world like no problem. We see people relocating all the time. So when people travel, what do? They find people in the areas where they are and they reproduce. So that's important to understand. Like, if you have, just touching back on that lineage perspective, if you have a friend of yours who just got married and is in what we would call an interracial relationship, which our people are not supposed to do, the men of Israel can deal with women of the other nations, but there's a certain way in which that has to be done. That's a certain way in which that has to be carried out. But the Lord commands our people to be holy and separate from the other nations, because there are women, if we make them our wives, can turn away our hearts from the Lord. And that's a great example of that can be found in, I believe it's either in the book of Ezra or the book of Nehemiah, where it talks about once our people were allowed to go back into the Holy Land to rear up the temple and the wall, how there were certain men who had taken wives of the other nations, strange wives as the scriptures call it. So, yes, these are concepts that we must understand. And even in the book of Revelation, it tells us that there will be a great multitude who are taken up out of great tribulation, out of all kindreds and nations and tongues, and they will stand before the Lamb and before the throne of God, roughly paraphrasing. And they will have made their garments white in the blood of the Lamb. And that the blood of the Lamb is just talking about the sacrifice that our Lord made on the cross. They will make their garments white, meaning they will be purified through baptism. So a little bit of a tangent, but the point is, our people come in many different shades and tones. That's not to just say that anybody who professes themselves to be, that's not to say that anybody who professes themselves to be an Israelite is an Israelite just because they say so, or because out of their own belly they feel as though the Spirit is working with them. But if you hail from the nations that I mentioned prior, or you're from, let's say, the west coast of Africa, where large concentrations of our people are, then you are indeed an Israelite. And like I said, if the Spirit works with you, the Rakakwadash, and it reveals things unto you by way of either dreams, visions, in the Word, then you may very well be an Israelite too, because you can't even understand the mysteries of the Scriptures in full unless that Rakakwadash indwells within you, communes with you, sups with you. So these are all ways in which we can identify our people, keep the commandments, build your faith. By doing so, you'll give yourself the best chance at deliverance. We all need to be hopeful that the Lord, when he comes back, will have mercy upon us. And when he delivers Jacob, that we are accounted worthy. So make sure you know how to properly characterize your brothers and sisters, so that you're not dealing with the other nations, and you're also not shunning those who may be of your kin. With that, I say Shalom, Israel. Shalom.